Birds chirped, dew glistened on the leaves, the sun shone through the white windows, and the warm morning light poured in. The maid was enjoying the beautiful day, hanging the laundry to dry. The other maids were complaining about the amount of laundry, and their hands ached terribly. Finally, the laundry ran out. One of the girls said that these days she had even developed muscles bigger than a blacksmith's. The maids were very tired. They wanted to rest for a while and go back, but if they came back early, everyone would find out that they were done with the laundry and give them more work. The girls saw Princess Grace. They looked out and discussed how beautiful she was and must have been happy since she was born, because her father is the emperor. The maid said that the princess wears the clothes she wants, can eat absolutely any food she wants. It seemed to them that Grace was living in paradise. The maid with blonde hair objected that, in fact, it's not like that. And, first of all, the princess's dress is very heavy. It is impossible to carry 20 kilograms on her all the time. The girl asked her coworkers how they would feel if they had to carry a pig in their arms all day long. Also, under the dress, Princess Grace has a narrow corset, and it feels as if the body is squeezed by a giant. The main difficulty was that despite how painful it is to walk around in such clothes, a flawless smile must be kept on her face. Now, to the maids, the princess did not seem so happy. The girls asked their colleague Diana how she knew all this. A few months ago, she too had been called a princess. Once upon a time, there was a king and queen and a little daughter. Diana Aslan von Salit was born to them. It seemed to the girl that, like other princesses, her life would be full of the happiness of love. But her mother died when the girl was 10 years old. Her father, who was supposed to remember her mother and mourn her death, immediately brought in a new queen. Diana missed her mommy and suffered a lot. However, she tried to be a good princess in the new family. The new queen asked the girl not to worry, and on behalf of the late queen promised to help her become the most elegant and beautiful princess. At the time, those words meant that she would become a victim of violence in the name of learning. Her stepmother told Diana that she could become better if she practiced even harder. She promised that from now on, every time she didn't say hello as befitting a princess, she would be beaten with a whip, and told her to try introducing herself one more time, even though Diana had already done it 100 times. The girl felt like she couldn't breathe because of the corset, and the dress was too heavy. It felt as if the protagonist was going to die right now. However, this was common for a princess of the kingdom. The protagonist bowed and said that Princess Diana welcomed her. The stepmother thought that was not how the girl should speak and struck her again with the whip. The new queen said that despite all her warnings, the princess still disobeyed. Diana was horrified and cried. The woman told her that princesses don't behave like that, accused the girl of being deprived of the honor of meeting His Majesty the King because of her. She called Diana nothing and said that the girl was not capable of anything for the sake of the kingdom. When Diana's father came into the room and saw that the girl was being beaten, he said that if a child can't speak properly, he should be taught, even if he had to be beaten. The protagonist hoped that Daddy would help her, but it was not so. Diana blamed herself for what was happening. She just wanted to find happiness and wished to be a good princess, worthy of her family. But she hated this family and wished she could change to another. Though the protagonist thought so, but in reality, it was impossible. On the day of her adulthood, in just half a day, the castle fell at the hands of the imperial army, and the palace was captured by the bloody Prince Rasheed. This was the first prince of the Levigan Empire. The prince told the king that he had received no reply to the letter offering surrender, so he decided to come in person. Diana thought that her father would surrender because it was a chance to stay alive. The protagonist's father said he would not beg Rasheed for mercy and asked him to just kill him. Diana could not believe that her father had said such words. The prince raised his sword and chopped off the king's head, saying that he had honored that request. That he did not bow his head to his enemies to the last is worthy of respect. Rasheed walked towards Diana. He came closer and closer. The girl's eyes filled with terror. Her life had not been so happy, but she didn't want this life to end like this. The protagonist bowed her head to the prince and begged him to spare her. The girl promised that she would do whatever the prince wanted as long as she was spared. Rasheed asked Diana if she would become his woman. The protagonist said that she was not inherently seductive beauty, but there is a gentle charm. Diana did not consider herself a beauty and looked so weak that all the people who met her asked if she wanted to sleep. The princess said that His Majesty would not be very happy with such a lady as his woman. However, she is very healthy and embroiders beautifully and also likes flavored tea. Diana told Rasheed that she was more suited to the role of a maid. Suddenly, the protagonist realized that she had spoken out loud nonsense. Rasheed wanted to look at the girl's face. Raising her head, the protagonist saw how handsome the prince was. It was said that he was the best swordsman on the continent. Using his handsome face, Rasheed chopped everyone indiscriminately. The prince told the protagonist that she was right, and her face is so white and round like a bun. Diana tried to figure out if he rejected her proposal. Rasheed decided, as she wished, she would become a maid and asked his assistant to loosen the rope on the wrists of the protagonist. The girl was glad that she had survived this hell and was able to stay alive. Diana expressed her gratitude to the prince and promised that she would never forget his favors. The prince said he had acquired something cute. He liked that the princess had become a maid, from princess of one country to maid of another country. Diana thought it was great, although she might have gotten desperate, but every time she came into the kitchen, the smell of newly baked bread and dirty clothes became clean. The garden was increasingly transformed, but before, the protagonist used to walk all day in such a corset, and now her life was not like the time when she had to smile like a doll. The girl felt peaceful and thought that maids were the best. She would like to live her whole life as a maid. The protagonist decided that she would scrub the floor clean. The other maids came up to her and told her she was doing something she wasn't asked to do again. The red-haired maid told Diana that she should know her place, but she thought the girl wanted to make a good impression on her masters. This girl's name was Jean, and she was a probationary maid. She told Diana that no matter what, she was still a slave who had been taken captive from the defeated side, and she could never become an official maid. The protagonist didn't understand what Jean was talking about. She compared these girls to the waste products of a goldfish. Diana assumed that by such a relationship they show their superiority over her. A probationary maid named Choo-Choo came in. She accused Jean of harassing the quiet girl again and told her to be quiet because she was not even helpful. Choo-Choo threatened the red-haired Jean that if she continued to behave like this, the senior maids would find out about it. Diana's offender justified herself and said that she had just given the girl some advice, but in return, she had been ordered to go and do the cleaning. Choo-Choo told Diana that these maids were very rude and told her not to keep quiet while they were bothering her, because they were getting in because they didn't fight back. The protagonist didn't even give it a second thought. For the former princess, who was humiliated by the queen, all these taunts seemed just cute mischief. Diana thought that if it was true, these maids were trying to show their superiority. Choo-Choo said that considering Jean's family, it was hard to fight and had its advantages. Jean was the daughter of a major merchant in the empire, and no matter how she behaved, she was destined to officially become a maid. The rest of the maids revolved around Jean, who was unscrupulous in her work, hiding behind her origins. The protagonist thought that the maid Choo-Choo looked like her. Diana liked her inner strength. Although she was the most outstanding maid among the newcomers, she had no one to rely on, so there was no certainty that she could officially take the maid position. Choo-Choo asked the protagonist if she had a place to go if she lost her place, because Diana was a foreigner who came to work as a maid in the palace. She didn't understand if she could count on the favor of the crown prince of the empire. Rasheed made a maid out of the crown princess. Perhaps the reason was that without seeing the crown prince's face, she bowed her head at his feet and begged for mercy. Diana supposed that her appearance might have struck him as pathetic and ridiculous. Compassion, akin to the whim of a man who had everything, hardly meant much to him. Diana said she didn't have someone who could help. Rasheed called his bodyguard, whose name was Stefan, and asked how that girl Diana was doing. The crown prince is an impossibly handsome man. He mesmerizes everyone around him. He looks so much like an angel that he charms even his enemies on the battlefield with his beauty. Stefan knew Rasheed well. They had been together since they were children. People really did get silly around him. The bodyguard talked about how Lady Diana was doing fine, and she had no experience, so she was a bit clumsy. But she was sincere, intelligent, quick to learn. Stefan said that it would take time to become an official maid. He wondered from Rasheed why he cared so much about this girl. The prince himself didn't know why. He felt sorry for Diana because he had trampled her country and killed her family. Stefan didn't understand how, after Rasheed had taken so many people's lives, he could care so much. Stefan asked the prince to answer honestly about being weak in front of tiny, harmless-eyed creatures. Rasheed agreed with his bodyguard's words. The prince called out the names of 3 small animals, a ferret, a squirrel, and a bird. This is the same bloody Prince Rasheed. This handsome, cruel man is a lover of small animals. Stefan was amazed every time he saw this scene. He told the prince that when he saw Diana, she reminded him of those animals in some way, and concluded that he liked the girl. Rasheed hoped that she would officially become a maid and be assigned to a good place. The bodyguard speculated that perhaps the prince was asking for her help. Stefan replied that she was a probationary maid, also with very poor skills, and he couldn't make her an official maid. The prince agreed with his bodyguard's words, but said that whether she can become an official maid or not, they are able to test her skills. Choo-Choo was upset at lunch that there were no meat dishes. Diana was eating beside her and thinking about how nice it was that now she didn't have to think about how to eat to look elegant or what kind of conversation to have at the table. Now she didn't have to worry about all of that. The main character was glad that now she could eat as much as she wanted, and it was paradise time. Jean appeared, telling Diana that she was from another country and marveling that she was even eating such food. The protagonist indifferently continued to chew and wondered if Jean had finished her taunts or would say something else. The red-haired maid was indignant at the girl's indifference, because usually, if you insult a person, the reaction should be different. Diana had an indifferent face, which really annoyed Jean, who told the protagonist that she was really funny and it wasn't cool at all to pretend that everything was fine. The red-haired maid didn't understand what was wrong with these foreign slaves who couldn't even hold a quarrel. Choo-Choo nervously stuck her fork into the table and told Jean that she was talking out of her ass and bullying the Tycho child. The girl replied that after following Diane around a few times, it became obvious that she didn't even know the cleaning rules. Jean thought she was the boss and told Chuch that she didn't understand something and mistakenly thought that if she was bigger, she was immediately in charge. The maid replied that such a boss is a piece of shit because all he does is bully quiet, good kids. The conflict continued. Diana watched what was going on. It was like a hyena and a bear fighting. The head maid's apprentice, Lilia, walked in and asked what was going on here. She told them to at least not fight in front of her, but otherwise she didn't care what they were doing, even if they were pulling each other's hair. Lilia announced that suddenly there was an official letter from the management, and in a few days there would be a tea party. The guests would be met by the maids, who were now in training. Everyone was surprised that maids on probation would be serving the guests. Lilia said that they, as attendants, must observe etiquette and should never forget it. This is a job they will be doing along with the official maids. One of the girls asked what kind of guests would be at the tea party, a lady from a noble family or a princess from another country. Lily told her that women who grow fruit would be brought to the palace. The taste of the fruit they had sent to the palace over the years was delicious, and the tea party would take place as a thank you. The training would take place the same day before the tea party, and after rising, everyone was to gather in the garden. At first, everyone rejoiced. Then one of the maids began to resent why she had to serve some obscure women. Jean told the protagonist that this job suits her just perfectly, because such people are just worthy of serving a maid like her. Because they were not aristocrats but members of the working class, the maids in training were asked to serve them because there was no need to use official maids. However, it all seemed very strange. The next morning, the maids gathered in the garden for tea etiquette training. Lilia was telling the girls that even though they were only on probation, they were still maids of the imperial palace and needed to study hard so as not to defame the honor of the imperial palace. Choo-Choo was glad that they weren't officially maids yet, but they were already allowed to do such a serious job. She wanted to definitely do everything perfectly. Unfortunately, passion and excellence were not always proportional. While pouring tea, Choo-Choo was sloppy and spilled some on the tablecloth. Lily once again reminded her that when pouring tea for a guest, not even a drop should spill. Jean laughed at her colleague's failure and talked about how no one liked this strong, big fool. and she should have tasted tea at least once in her life. Otherwise, how could she tell the difference between it and the beer that minors like her father drank? Lily, hearing these taunts, told Jean to go out next, and she did an excellent job. She had been trained by an etiquette teacher in the capital, and the tuition was fabulous. Jean was not the type of person who should remain just a maid on probation. She wanted to become a head maid and serve Her Majesty the Empress. The red-haired girl did quite well for a first-timer. The main character, watching all this, thought that this was the level of a trainee, because when the girl was a princess in her past life, she was served by carefully selected maids. And in those moments when Diana made the slightest mistake and was physically punished by the queen, these maids, in order not to incur the queen's wrath, served tea more elegantly than any noble lady, pouring it as if there was air in it. Compared to the maids who served in Diana's palace, everyone here seemed clumsy to her. Lily called Diana next to come out and try to pour the tea. The main character realized that she wasn't a princess right now and didn't want to stand out much. Diana poured the tea in a long stream, a little rough and clumsy. She really wanted to live quietly in the imperial palace and thought she should be inconspicuous to do so. At first, everyone was excited to welcome the guests, but after the training, people dispersed to their places, for they had to quickly do the work they couldn't do in the morning: clean the palace, light the fireplaces, do the laundry, wash the dishes. The maids were praised, saying that they had all done a good job today. The maids were given leftover freshly baked bread, and it was the best snack for maids in training, a delicacy. The main character loved this bread and only worked in the kitchen because of its flavor. The girl was very glad that she was sent here. Diana considered herself similar to Chucha, and also quickly did all the work. Diana chewed the bread and pondered the fact that Chuchu was kind of weird today and hadn't spoken all day. The protagonist decided to ask what was going on. The maid replied to Diana that she was ashamed. It turns out that she was told off the most during her training. It was the first time that Chucha, who was always praised, was scolded so much. It was the first difficulty for her. She told Diane that Jean was right when she said that she had really never had anything like tea in her life. Chuchu said that she couldn't get any better just by being a little more skilled. She thought that everyone would notice that she was the clumsiest, and worried that she might offend the guests with her ineptitude. The protagonist realized that even though it was the crown prince who made her a maid, the person who truly helped her become one was Chuchu. Diana realized that if she could help her in any way, she would definitely do so. The protagonist suggested that Chuchu undergo special training with her. She said that she trains every day during breaks, and if the maid would train with her, she could quickly improve her skills. Chuchu was very excited that Diana would teach her. She hugged the main character and called her a kind little girl. The maid told the protagonist that she was always cleaning like crazy without raising her eyes, so it seemed like she didn't know anything herself. After that, Chuchu and Diana started having a special class every night. In the evening after dinner, in the maid's kitchen, the protagonist would demonstrate how to pour tea properly. First, you had to heat water and pour enough water into the kettle and measure out 1 teaspoon of tea. It's hard enough to learn the whole brewing process, but to become a professional required a lot of practice. You had to add the tea leaves and pour boiling water, then pass it through a sieve. Chuchu was trying very hard, and Diana praised her. At least she hadn't messed up the sequence, and now the guests wouldn't mock her. The next time, not a drop of tea was spilled at all. Chuchu thanked Diana. After all, it was all thanks to her. She taught everything much better than Lily teaches. The protagonist replied that it was all thanks to the hard work of a good student. During these daily practices, the protagonist and Chuchu became closer and closer. The girl told Diana that she was from a mining town in the east, and her father was a miner. He worked without weekends because he had 13 children to feed. Diana marveled at the number of children. It was a big and friendly family, but it was very difficult to feed them all. Chuchu admitted that she wanted to help at least a little, so she got a job as a maid, and that's how she ended up here. She had heard that if you get a position as a maid, you can make good money. Diana told her friend that she was a good daughter. Chuchu confirmed this and said that now her younger brothers would be able to eat meat. She asked the protagonist how she ended up in the palace, because the girl came from another country, so she had more difficulties. Diana realized that if she confessed that she had been a princess of another country not so long ago, It would only complicate things. She said that the crown prince took pity on her for mourning her family and offered to be a maid. Choo-Choo marveled that Crown Prince Rasheed could actually suggest it himself. It was surprising that this prince, who had never faced defeat on the battlefield and was truly bloodthirsty, could worry about someone else. Choo-Choo had already heard from other maids passing by that he was popular. His Highness was more beautiful than a carved statue. His silver hair shone in the sun, and his bright violet eyes resembled the Milky Way. There were rumors that his eyes were so beautiful that they even looked unreal. Choo-Choo longed to see him at least once. Diana confirmed that he was indeed very handsome, and all those rumors were true. Choo-Choo heard that unlike his beautiful looks, the prince's character is quite cruel. The main character confirmed this information as well. Diana told her friend that Rasheed beheaded her family without a second thought. Choo-Choo immediately began to apologize for bringing up this senseless topic. She said that she did not even think about it and did not know that something so terrible had happened. The protagonist realized that if she had told the truth about her real feelings about her parents' murder, nothing good would have come of it. Diana said it was okay, and it didn't matter to her at all, because the people she called her family had abused her all her life. Choo-Choo cried and said it couldn't be. It was impossible not to feel anything when the only people close to her were killed. She hugged Diana tightly and promised to kill her for saying such bad things. The protagonist was sure that everything would be okay. She explained that it had been a long time since then, and everything was fine now. Choo-Choo thought that Diana was saying all this because she felt sorry for her and called the girl kind. Choo-Choo hugged the main character tightly. Anyway, after that day, Choo-Choo's attitude towards Diana changed completely. Their relationship became strong and friendly. In the afternoon, during cleaning, Jean again wanted to bully Diana. But next to her was always a large Choo-Choo, who protected the girl and told the red-haired maid that if she tried to say anything, her face would be pulled like cheese and pulled on a stick. But that wasn't the only thing that had changed. Choo-Choo was constantly bringing some kind of food for the main character. This time she brought candy, saying that the kitchen maid had given her one. Choo-Choo talked about how she herself was big, but Diana was the size of acorn, so she should eat more food and grow. After tasting the candy, the heroine was delighted with that sweet flavor. Choo-Choo told Diana that it was much tastier and sweeter than black bread. She was angry that the bastard crown prince had killed Diana's entire good girl family and thought he was a psychopathic murderer. Everything inside Choo-Choo was bubbling over about it. The protagonist even felt a little sorry for the crown prince because Choo-Choo hated him so much. But it was nice to have someone on her side. Diana realized that being the kind of person he was anyway, Rasheed obviously heard such curses to his side 1,000 times a day. Stefan handed the crown prince a letter from Baroness Appleton. Rasheed looked strange somehow, and the bodyguard asked what was going on with him. It turned out that the prince's ears had suddenly started to swell, which meant that someone was scolding him badly. According to imperial superstition, if your ears are burning, someone behind your back is talking bad about you. Stefan said that if that was indeed the case, it was probably not just today, but the prince had probably been rolling around on the floor all year because his ears were constantly burning. Rasheed reached his hand out to the basket of apples that were on the table. He said that it looked delicious and Appleton apples were really the best. And Stefan was in agreement that these apples really were the best. Rasheed said that no matter how often the wonderful flavor of these apples was praised, the farmers themselves were never invited to the imperial palace. The bodyguard guessed that the prince wanted to test Diana under the pretext of apples. Rasheed said he would honor Stefan and let him play with his children for half a day. The bodyguard refused because the only thing worse than such a gift was its absence. The prince sympathized that Stefan wouldn't know how cute his children were. After reading the letter, Rasheed happily informed him that, by an incredible coincidence, Baroness Appleton would also be pleased to attend the tea party. The prince looked forward to the morrow. The day of the tea party arrived. The maids were aware that if poorly prepared, it could affect the honor of the imperial family, so the maids on probation serving at today's tea party were busier than usual. In the morning, they leveled the lawn, and on it, they arranged white tables according to the number of guests invited. They decorated the tables with purple hydrangeas that had been picked this morning, which looked very unusual. Diana arranged the flowers on the tables and admired their beauty. Choo-Choo told the girl that not only the women farmers would come to the tea party today, but also the baroness, the owner of the orchards. The protagonist realized that in that case, it would be a very different atmosphere. The maids were very excited because they not only had to greet their first guests, but also to impress the baroness. Choo-Choo noticed that Jean looked so beautiful with that new hairpin and makeup. Still, this appearance was too much, because usually the more the worse. And Diana thought Jean was a fool to put on such makeup to make a good impression on the baroness. The girl said that these were her first guests she would meet as a maid. Choo-Choo was very worried and said she wanted to look beautiful, at least a little too. Diana reassured her friend and told her not to worry, saying that she would definitely do well because she had taken lessons from the great teacher and was also an excellent student. The time came, and when the gates opened and the guests entered, the maids gave them a warm and hospitable welcome. The guests admired the imperial palace and put on their best dresses. When the greeting was over, the maids in front began to take turns escorting the guests to the tables. Jean was still standing and twisting her head around as if looking for someone. In fact, she wanted to serve Baroness Appleton. Her intentions were obvious. Diana noticed that Jean was not the only one acting this way. There was a noble atmosphere among the maids. The main tea party guests were delighted and thanked for such a wonderful welcome. The maids of the imperial palace really behaved like aristocrats. According to the guests, they even looked different, elegant, and beautiful. Since the guests were working-class people, they were treated more easily. The tea party would not begin until all the guests had arrived. As a rule, the last person to keep everyone waiting is the protagonist. A carriage pulled up, and out of it stepped a very beautiful tall girl dressed in purple. Baroness Appleton. Everyone marveled at how tall the guest was. Jean came out first to greet the Baroness and thanked her for attending the tea party at the Imperial Palace. The red-haired maid turned around and with an angry face made it clear to her other colleagues that this person would be served by her. Jean told Mrs. Appleton to pass and promised to escort her to her seat. A rich scent of roses emanated from the guest. This fragrance was quite popular among aristocrats, but the protagonist thought that Baron Appleton was from a simple noble family, but looking at this woman gave a completely different impression. Diana looked at the Baroness and admired her beauty. One of the maids thought about how amazing it was to be the wife of a baron who owned orchards on the outskirts of town. Another maid talked about how jealous she was of Jean serving such a beautiful mistress. The protagonist noticed the surprised looks of the maids. She wondered who they saw there. Diana, in any case, wanted to serve an ordinary person, even if it was not the Baroness. A hunched and wrinkled old woman stepped out of the carriage. No one wanted to serve such an unsightly person. In any case, the tea party would not begin until the last guest arrived. Diana walked over and bowed to her grandmother, thankful that she was visiting the Imperial Palace. No guest was to be left unattended. The last guest was escorted to a table by the protagonist. There were 4 guests sitting at the tables, and one maid was introduced to each of them. After they seated all the guests, the tea party in the Imperial Palace finally began. Some of the guests couldn't imagine that they would ever attend such an event, because it wasn't just a tea party, it was an Imperial Palace tea party. One of the girls thought she would be picking apples until she was old, but now she was sitting and enjoying the luxury here. Diana noticed that the conversations of the guests, very simple and filled with sincerity, they were not like those conversations where everyone slanders each other. Maybe that's why she was so calm now. The protagonist decided that, still, she would remain cautious. The maids introduced today's dessert. This chocolate was made from special cocoa, and one had to put a piece in their mouth and let it slowly melt. It was the same famous chocolate that kings and princesses ate. It was so delicious that it could even soothe a crying prince. The guests called this dessert fantastic. They had heard of it, but never thought they would ever get to try it. After taking a bite, one of the guests was hit with a huge wave called sweetness. The dessert was so delicious and sweet that one's tongue could fall off. The dessert stopped getting smaller and smaller, and the guests didn't want it to disappear. Diana realized that if they were trying chocolate for the first time, the reaction was quite expected. The protagonist was curious to see the reaction of the other guests, whether they liked the dessert. She turned around and saw an old lady with chocolate on her face. The elderly guest was flushed from being in an awkward situation. Diane approached the old lady and held out a napkin, saying she was uncomfortable because of the chocolate on her hands. Other guests needed handkerchiefs as well. Some of the guests were embarrassed because it was so good that no one could resist. One of the guests told Diana that they were serving noble ladies and princesses, and it must be embarrassing for them to serve such commoners. The main character asked not to talk like that and promised to hand out handkerchiefs to everyone. Diana announced to the guests that everyone was a dear guest and asked them to relax and enjoy the tea party. The main character poured the tea again, or said that these black leaves were collected from Mount Ingrid. The guests were asked to let her know if they wanted a different tea, but the guests seemed to be fine with it. One of the people present said that this tea was drunk by members of the imperial family, and that was probably why it gave off such a wonderful fragrance. Another girl wasn't sure if this tea was somehow different from the tea she drinks at home. The old lady said that in order to know the taste of fine food, one should taste it more often. But what could they know about it? There was only one person among them who knew about it, their hostess, Baroness Appleton. Diana told her guest of their hostess that they had never confirmed her identity and asked how well she knew the Baroness's face. The girl replied that Mrs. Appleton had recently married and had never been to the farm until now, so the girl had never seen her face. The guest went on to say that it was rumored that the Baron had fallen in love with the Baroness at first sight, and everyone wondered if she was that beautiful. Observing the tall girl in purple robes, the protagonist noticed that she was perfectly trained in etiquette, so she was almost certain that this girl was indeed Baroness Appleton. Diana realized that Jean needed to listen to her guest well and not make mistakes, because if you make such a person angry, the tea party could turn into total chaos. Jean remembered that everyone present at this event deserved attention, but this woman sitting in front of her was much more important than everyone else. The red-haired maid thought about the fact that she was the daughter of a merchant, and if she was not to serve anyone, it was definitely that great man, not commoners. Jean served the guest a dessert and said that this chocolate was made in the imperial palace, and such a high-quality dessert is quite hard to find. The guest turned to Jean, who was serving her, and asked how much longer she could tolerate the maid's neglect. She told the maid that her greeting was an unceremonious look of insolence, not to mention the dessert, which was served as if it were alms. The guest was telling Jean that even her serving was awful, and she didn't want to put up with this boorishness any longer. The red-haired maid promised that she would serve the tea properly again, although mentally the girl realized that she had not made a single mistake, because she had learned to pour tea from a noblewoman, and she was praised by the maids in training. The mysterious woman in purple said that the competence of the palace maids was always at the highest level, but now she saw the opposite and thought that a maid who performed her duties poorly should be punished and beaten with a whip all night. Jean, hearing these words, was frightened and shocked. Her hands trembled. The guest told the girl that if she made another mistake, the next time she would have her tongue cut off. The maid was very frightened. Diane ran up to Jean and her guest and told them that they still lacked skills and were unable to serve properly. The girl asked her guest to be magnanimous and have mercy. The guest replied that if everyone could be forgiven by simply bowing their head and apologizing, this world would be too easy. The Lady of Honor was not going to watch this farce any longer. The protagonist said that this tea party was arranged by the imperial family, and if it ended on a bad note, it might hurt the imperial couple. The guest crossed her arms over her chest. Diana explained that it was just a request from a maid wanting to make the guests feel better. The purple-clad girl agreed, but said that if she wasn't satisfied with all of this, the punishment Jean was to receive would go to Diana. The protagonist bowed her head to her guest. Diana recalled how her stepmother, with a predatory look, said that she had long wanted to taste the tea prepared by Princess Diana, because everyone called it insanely delicious. The protagonist was repeatedly asked to do this, and she was not allowed to make the slightest mistake, otherwise she could lose her life. For some reason, this situation made her remember this moment. The protagonist had said that she had brewed Ingrid black leaves and asked if the guest minded. Now it was more important than anything else to become the perfect maid. The main secret of tea flavor was in the tea leaves. However, It was not only the leaves that were important, but also the right amount of them. Diana supposed that Jean's tea might not have tasted right because she didn't have a scale to weigh it on, so it was either too tart or not rich at all. An unfilled spoonful of brew with no slides or lumps, the right temperature, the perfect time to brew the tea. It was necessary to raise the kettle high above the cup so that the jet was in contact with the air, so that the flavor would be brighter. All of this had to be done carefully so as not to spill the tea. It needed a perfect balance. Diana realized that the temperature of the water and the amount of brew were perfectly matched, and asked her guest to tell her if she didn't like the tea. However, it was still all very subjective, and no matter how well the tea was selected or brewed, it just might not be to Madame's liking. Taking a sip, the guest smiled and said it was great. The main character was very happy that everything worked out and told the guest if she needed anything, she could always turn to her. The exciting and tense tea party ended safely. One of the guests thanked the girl for everything and said that thanks to the palace maids, they had all enjoyed the tea party. Diana responded by thanking her for her understanding and wishing her a safe journey. Turning around, Diana saw the very old lady who seemed to want to say something. The protagonist came closer. Her grandmother told her that she was actually quite worried because she was quite clumsy, and there were some not-so-good rumors about the palace, so she was scared. The old lady talked about how she would never have such an opportunity again, so she mustered up the courage to come to this tea party, drank fragrant tea, ate sweet chocolate, and held conversations with the other girls. She was enthusiastic and said she would never forget this day. The guests thanked Diane again for making such wonderful memories. Maids from back in the day don't show their true feelings to guests, as politeness is a manifestation of virtue. The protagonist told the old lady that it was an honor to serve such a man. Around the corner, a mysterious guest dressed in purple was watching. The tea party was over, and the maids set to work. They had been preparing for the banquet since morning and were tired after serving the guests in the scorching sun. Normally, the life of a maid is expected to have the stability of a work contract, guaranteed vacation time, work-life balance, and overtime pay. In reality, life as a probationary maid was very different: catastrophically understaffed, horrendously busy, irregular working hours, a constant supervisor, not to mention cleaning from day one of work. Lily praised the maids. They were very tired. Still, there was a definite upside to this job. They could finish the leftovers. The imperial chocolate was really delicious combined with the soft butter. Choo-Choo refused to eat sweets and said that when she ate a lot of sweets, she lost muscle mass. It seemed to Diane that her friend was having a hard time restricting herself. One of the guests really wanted Choo-Choo to come work at their farm. Her biceps were so big and she appeared to be very strong. The other maids approached Diane and said she did everything amazing and really did a great job with everything. The girls asked the main character to teach them the skill, even though they had once ignored Diana because she was from another country. The protagonist was surprised at how quickly the attitude of her colleagues changed. Apparently, they were very ashamed of their own skills. Jean listened to all this from the sidelines and said that the girls had gone mad. Because Diana had served tea well, they now bowed their heads to a slave from another country. One of the maids shamed Jean, saying that she had been silent throughout the tea party, and because she had made a mistake in front of the baroness, the tea party could be ruined. The maid thought Jean should be ashamed that Diana had to deal with her problems. All the servants could have been punished because of Jean. If they had been unlucky, they could have lost their jobs. The girls resented that now the red-haired maid was shouting instead of apologizing, despite the situation, still trying to be in charge. Jean was furious. She clenched her fists and told the girls, "Let them continue to be friends with these country girls." The maid said that Baroness Appleton was on a different level than the other guests, and even sitting down, she looked elegant. Diana pondered that the Baroness looked that way, obviously not because of her posture. Her gait and the way she drank her tea, her every gesture was filled with restrained dignity. But the protagonist still had the feeling that that mysterious girl was not the Baroness. Stefan, the prince's bodyguard, stood at the entrance to Rasheed's chambers. From the dark corridor appeared the figure of the tall girl dressed in purple who was present at the tea party. Stefan told her that if she continued to enter His Majesty's chambers like that, they would be in trouble. Stefan called this girl a princess. He said that Rasheed seemed normal, but in reality he was a pervert who only thought about the soft pads of squirrels' paws. The guy laughed and apologized for saying something unnecessary. The girl laughed back and said that he could go on. She thought this play was quite funny. Stefan replied that he didn't think the prince was funny. The princess was sorry, for she wanted to see the best knight of this empire, Stefan, cry and repent for his sins. The girl looked like a real Disney princess. She called the little animals to her. Stefan said he would prepare a bath for Her Highness. Stefan reflected on the fact that Rasheed had bought expensive magic stones that cost more than the mansion to pass half a day as a woman. The magic stone would transform a person's body for half a day. The prince took a bath, and his bodyguard asked what results he had gotten during today's visit and if Lady Diana had lived up to his expectations. The prince replied that the girl had, in a way, succeeded. To a man who only a few months ago was a princess, it would seem that it would not be easy to adhere to maid etiquette. Rasheed recalled how Diana had begged for another chance and promised that she would surely be able to satisfy the mistress with her serving of tea. The position of Diana's hands holding the teapot and the slight tilt of her head to avoid eye contact, it was perfect, as if she had reproduced the contents of the etiquette book exactly. And she had a grace that could not be hidden even under a maid's uniform. Stefan thought the prince was an idiot, and his words were the ravings of a madman, because usually Rasheed always had reasons to hate. That was the kind of man he was. Lack of common sense, not sincere small talk. The prince was an incredible misanthrope. Rasheed has a rather strange view of people. Stefan had a hard time assuming that the prince was going to bring Diana to the crown prince's palace. He thought it was absurd to bring the princess of a conquered country into his palace as his personal maid. The bodyguard reminded the prince that he had trampled Diana's country and family, and just because she seems calm now, it doesn't mean she can't do some evil in the future to get revenge. Even if the princess doesn't think about it, something could provoke her, so it's dangerous to bring her to the palace. Diana looked at the tablecloth. At first glance, it appeared to be intact and without holes, but then it was still discovered that the fabric appeared to be torn. The protagonist did a great job, quickly and accurately sewing everything up. In this way, she applied her embroidery skill, which she had been learning since she was 5 years old, and would finally be able to see the fruits of her training. The maids admired Diana's talents and asked her to teach her to sew. Lilia entered and told the protagonist that a guest had come to see her. Baroness Appleton came in and wanted to talk to the girl. Everything seemed to go well during the tea party, but what could have happened and why the Baroness had come was unclear. Looking at Lady Appleton, Diana could not believe her eyes. The Baroness apologized for such a sudden visit and said she wanted to introduce herself properly this time. It was the same old lady who had been served by the protagonist at the tea party. The Baroness told Diana that she had made a great impression on her during the tea party, so she decided to reintroduce herself. The old lady said it was nothing unusual, but she wanted to express her feelings and asked if Diana had a minute. There was a full basket of apples on the table nearby. Lady Appleton motioned for the protagonist to sit down and talk. Diana wondered if this woman was the Baroness, who was the disgruntled lady that Jean was serving. The mysterious woman had never once referred to herself as a Baroness. The protagonist apologized to the old lady and said that she had no idea and had made a huge mistake. Diana was ashamed. She couldn't believe she had made a mistake and apologized if she had offended her in any way. Miss Appleton laughed and said that she had hidden her own identity and really didn't hold grudges. Diana looked at her guest in amazement and tried to figure out what was going on. A tea party hosted by the imperial family, this was a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity. The Baroness really wanted to go to this event. She looked in the mirror and thought her appearance was ridiculous. She lived in complete seclusion. The old lady was sure exactly what she would hear when she went to the palace in this form. She thought everyone would look down on her and wonder how Baroness Appleton could be so ugly. The lady thought that the farmers in her garden would decide the same thing and that it was impossible. The invitation letter from the imperial palace asked her to conceal her identity when she arrived at the tea party. The Baroness didn't know why she would do that, but she thought it was a chance for her, because if she hid her identity, no one would pay attention to her. Even without makeup and in her gray baggy uniform, it was impossible to hide her virtues. That day, the maid impressed the baroness very much, and she thought that she too wanted to learn the same elementary movement as Diana. So the next day after the tea party, she began to study etiquette. Thanks to the maid who helped the baroness deal with her fears, she remembered how much fun she had during the tea party. Miss Appleton wanted to express the formal thanks she had been unable to give earlier. If it were any baroness in the world, she should not greet a probationary maid in this way, Diana thought. She noted the tilt, the position of the hand, and the improperly raised hem edge, and yet she could sense this woman's character. Though it was only a greeting, it showed the kind of person she was. The baroness is a woman who lives surrounded by love, and a person who gives even more love to others. Diana felt she had no right to judge her. The maid told Lady Appleton that she was too kind to her. The protagonist could only respond respectfully to those sentiments. Diana said that the feelings her mistress had given her she would never forget, and would accept with gratitude. The maid took a basket of apples. After helping themselves, the maids cried tears of joy and said that if there was poison in that apple, they would have continued eating anyway. For the maids, who worked all day long and ate only stale bread, Baroness Appleton brought honey apples and became their goddess. The girls admired their taste and said that in the next life they wanted to become the Baroness's apple tree. When the protagonist tasted the apple, it turned out that it was really very tasty. But still, Diana was worried about the identity of that lady, whether she was from the imperial family, for she, like the prince, had silver hair and violet eyes. Lily walked into the maids and said that it looked like even if the world started to fall apart, they would pluck the last apple tree and eat everything. The head maid announced that Diana had been promoted to official maid as of today. The head maid dropped the apple on the floor out of surprise. Jean was furious. She did not understand such a decision and asked Lily to explain everything properly, thinking that the others did not agree with such a decision either. In response, she heard that the tea party, which had taken place a few days ago, was an opportunity to test their abilities, and she would not even name the person who had performed the best, because they all knew who it was. Lilia said that no more questions on this topic would be accepted, and Diana would leave for the Ruby Palace at dawn tomorrow and take up the position of Princess Arys's maid there. That was the latest news. The protagonist reflected on the fact that everyone wanted to be the official maid, and she came later than everyone else, but they noticed her early. Diana tried not to stand out and didn't understand why she was promoted in that case. She was sure that everyone would definitely hate her now. The protagonist thought she was used to being hated by others. The other maids sincerely congratulated Diana and said that they were so jealous that she would be serving the princess herself. The protagonist got so excited that she asked aloud if the maids were really okay. She was sure that they would definitely hate her now. One of the girls replied that she was a little disappointed, but honestly, if it wasn't for Diana, she could have been in even more serious trouble. Another maid said that she didn't want to become petty because of her inferiority complex. Besides, thanks to Diana, she had eaten as many apples as she had never tasted in her whole life, and they were insanely delicious. The protagonist was happy about this reaction and said she would remember it. She thanked her coworkers. Diana thought that these girls were different from the people she had met before. The girl promised the maids that when she got her first paycheck, she would be sure to buy them something delicious. Jean didn't stop and called the girls stupid. She said that nothing would change from them pretending that everything was fine. The red-haired maid wondered if the other maids were not offended to realize how a girl with a dark past and low origins could become an official maid. She thought it was completely absurd. Choo-Choo called all these words nonsense. Jean said she would tell her father everything and ran away. There were still plenty of apples left, and to throw them all away would be a great waste. The maids had eaten enough of the delicious apples, and Jean's mood was strangely improved. Fortunately, Diana had few possessions. She had never imagined that everything would happen so suddenly, and she would become an imperial maid from tomorrow. The probationary period was long on one hand and quite short on the other. However, it was much better than the times when Diana was a princess. The protagonist found it tedious, but a lot of fun. Someone knocked on Diana's room. The girl got out of bed and asked who came. Choo-Choo walked in. She said she wanted to give a commemorative gift in honor of her officially becoming a maid. Choo-Choo handed Diana a hairpin and explained that her had to buy the gift in a hurry, and the other maids had decorated it a little too. The maid asked the protagonist to drive to her new life and not let herself be fooled. They paid very little during her probationary period, but Choo-Choo probably bought that hairpin with her savings. Even though she didn't voice it, her behavior gave it away. The maid saw Diana crying and asked if she didn't like the gift. The protagonist was struck to the core and felt as if someone had squeezed her heart. Choo-Choo talked about asking the salesperson to pick out the most beautiful hairpin. Diana hugged her friend tightly and thanked her, saying that the hairpin was very beautiful. Choo-Choo had a good heart and told Diana to stop crying and go to sleep. The main character thought that now only good things were ahead of her. Lily was in the kitchen talking to one of the maids about the princess having a personal maid. The girl replied that it was her, but she was transferred here because she wasn't doing well. Lily was very surprised. The former maid of the imperial palace said it was hard to understand what she had been through and asked for a cup of tea. It seemed to her that only someone who had gone through it herself would be able to understand. The girl said that doing housework was much easier. In this empire, there were simply no maids capable of looking after a lady. In the morning, Diana was getting ready to go and put a hairpin on her hair that Choo-Choo had given her. From princess of the kingdom to a maid in the imperial palace. The protagonist decided that from now on, she would only follow the road strewn with flowers. The princess's previous maid warned Diana that an incredibly difficult job awaited her, and all the other maids ran away. She too had been given the chance and had gone. Diana suggested that she would have a hard time because she would be alone. The girl replied to the protagonist that it would be very difficult, and especially to serve the princess. Diana asked if she was so picky. The maid replied that it is not fastidiousness, but just this girl. She is the worst thing in this palace. The emperor fell in love with the dancer Rosemary at first sight, and as a gift, she received a small mansion with a small garden, the Ruby Palace. In this palace, Rosemary became pregnant and gave birth to a daughter. Now the 7th princess of the empire lived there. Diana was led into the palace. The girl looked around carefully. She thought it was really very beautiful and atmospheric. The former maid knocked on the door to the princess and asked if she could come in to introduce her to the new maid. Diana speculated that the girl might have been branded as dirty blood. When the door opened, the princess was standing on a chair holding a huge spider on a string. The previous maid, upon seeing this picture, fainted. The protagonist pondered how it was possible to grow so beautiful and brave. Under such circumstances, it was very unlikely. Diana wasn't scared of the spider at all, and the little princess asked her why she didn't react in any way. Diana apologized and said that she was distracted and could react any way she wanted. The main character put her hands on her head and started screaming, supposedly out of fright. Finished with the introduction, she asked the princess if she could be greeted. The new maid bowed to the princess and said that her name was Diana, and it was a pleasure to meet her. The girl looked at the main character carefully and didn't understand why she wasn't scared. She told Diana to leave now because she hates maids and closed the door. The protagonist didn't understand what this situation even was. The maid who fainted woke up and thanked the girl because thanks to the protagonist, she was now free. The previous maid had long wanted to leave this terrible place, but could not because of the lack of maids. Na thanked Diana very much for helping her escape. The protagonist asked to be told how to deal with all of this. The previous maid princess replied that it was nothing special, and one should just take care of the girl, and the rest can be done as you wish, and in any case, in the palace will be only her and this little devil. Diana didn't understand how she should be. There were no principals there, the mistress hated her, and then there was this job. However, she realized that she had to, so she had to. The protagonist decided that she would start by cleaning. The palace was very dirty. No matter how much they cleaned it, it was worth just wiping it down, and everything immediately began to shine clean. The result was like a reward for Diana. The princess appeared behind the main character's back and said that she was doing a useless job. Diana asked the girl if she wanted something done for her. Princess was angry that she was being treated like a princess again. No one had ever treated her like that before. She asked Diana not to be so nice to her and said that anyway, she would want to get out of there too as soon as she had the chance. Stefan asked Rasheed why he had sent Diana specifically to the Ruby Palace, though now was not the time to think about it. The prince said that now he thought it would be a great idea to invite this child to his palace. The bodyguard thought it was worth agreeing to that opinion right away before he got cranky. Stefan promised to pass the information to the head maid and told Rasheed to rest. At that moment, he was just taking a bath. The prince asked if he was going to bring her right away and didn't even give him time to think. He remembered Diana. Her smiling face seemed very sweet to him. Rasheed said that anyway, the Ruby Palace was not that far away, and he hoped they would see each other soon. Diana talked to the princess and explained that she was a hired hand, and if a better place came along, it was perfectly fine to go there. But for now, she would stay here and promised to try to take good care of the princess while she was her maid. The girl kicked back the bucket with her foot and asked if Diana would put up with all of this. The maid replied that she would. The princess did some more mischief, but the protagonist did not react in any way. Diana entered the princess's room and brought her some food. The girl screamed in horror and said that the milk and vegetables were unpalatable, asking her to bring snacks. The maid replied that it was not a good idea to eat snacks instead of healthy food. It became obvious that the girl was picky. The main character explained that if the princess skipped meals, she wouldn't be able to grow up healthy. The girl asked not to be deceived and said that she was already perfectly grown, big and strong, showed her hands. In fact, they were very thin. The maid was horrified at how thin this child was. The princess said she was already 10 years old. It didn't matter how difficult it was to handle the child. It couldn't be used as an excuse not to look after the princess. The heroine knew she had to take good care of her. Diana walked over to the girl, took her hand, and told her that she wasn't lying, and if Arys continued like this, she might have health problems, so she should eat her vegetables first, and then there would be snacks. In the morning, Diana opened the window and tried to wake up the princess by telling her that she had already brought a delicious breakfast. Arys replied that she was asleep and told her to take it back out. A little later, when the princess got up and looked at the breakfast that Ona had brought her, was furious and told her to bring normal food. The main character said that this was all that was left, as she had eaten all the cream buns and fried chicken that were on the menu. Arys was furious. She was telling Diana that she had lost her mind and ate her breakfast. The protagonist said that she was only following the rules of the imperial family, and all food after the imperial family's meal is left to the maids. Diana told the princess that she didn't eat her breakfast, so she personally had to straighten it out. It is very easy to feed a finicky child. She said that if the girl didn't eat everything now, Diana wouldn't leave a bite of the delicious food. If you starve like that for a long time, any child will eat well afterward. Arys was already happily eating the food she had been given. Diana had been through something like this herself, so she knew what to do. The next strategy was the idea that the food that the picky child wouldn't eat was Diana's favorite food. The protagonist was glad that Arys had left so much of her favorite salad. The princess angrily took the food and said she wasn't done yet and ate every last crumb. The girl said that there was nothing left and Diana would have to starve all day because she had done a good job and ate everything. The protagonist patted Arys on the head and said that she was smart and the princess was really the best. The girl reacted surprised at the gesture, and the protagonist apologized, saying that she had been careless. Arys told the maid that she had eaten everything and asked her not to bother her anymore and to leave. The girl was holding her hands to her hair, not understanding what it was and why Diana was stroking her head. The eating problem was solved. Now the bathroom issue had to be solved. The protagonist called the girl and suggested a good time in the bathtub. Arys replied that she hated coming in contact with water. The brush scratched a lot, and she didn't like soap. The girl asked for these horrible things to be put away. Diana told the princess in her ear that if she didn't wash, she would get bugs on her that liked dirt. They would get in her hair and on her skin, and of course the princess also went to the toilet, so sometimes they could even be in her butt. Arys's eyes widened, and she said that it was all lies, because she had never seen such bugs before. The main character replied that when her head itched and it felt like something was clicking, that was the sound of growing bugs. The princess gave up and said she would go take a bath. Arys only took a bath when there were some events in the imperial palace and didn't see the point of it. However, she didn't want to be eaten by bugs. Seeing the washcloth, the girl squirmed because the thing scratches a lot. But as Diana started to wash the girl, she realized that it didn't hurt as much as last time and even felt good. The soap didn't get in her eyes, and she also liked the smell of rosemary. The main character noticed that the girl was thinking about something. It came to brushing her teeth. Diana said that the nasty little bugs were destroying her teeth with leftover food. The princess gave in. On the pretext that bugs like wet hair, they managed to dry it. Toward nightfall, the princess climbed on the bed and said she was going crazy over the maid. She was very tired and exhausted. Diana leaned her palm against Arys's cheek and said that she did a great job. The main character was very affectionate to this girl. Before going to bed, she said that the princess needed to get a good night's sleep and gain strength. Diana decided to tell Arys a story. The princess resented that Diana had been bullying her since morning, and now she was going to interfere with her sleep. The girl yelled that she would go to bed whenever she wanted and told the maid to leave. The protagonist said she was sorry and wanted to help sleep with her interesting story, but if the princess didn't want to, she could just leave. Arys stopped the maid and said she wanted to hear the story. Once upon a time, there was a princess of diamonds. This girl, as her name implies, fell in love with sparkling diamonds. Collecting these gems from everywhere, she adorned herself head to toe with diamonds. The princess shone brightly, but one day she learned that a dragon owned a gemstone that was rumored to be the most durable and beautiful diamond in the world. The princess was very eager to take it for herself, and after traveling through thorny swamps and cliffs, she finally reached the dragon tower. The dragon guarding the tower looked at the princess and said that she was very beautiful, and if she would marry him, he would give the diamond to her. Diana noticed that the girl had fallen asleep. Leaving, the protagonist kissed Arys on the forehead and promised that she would help her grow up healthy, because this, the work of a maid. The next day, the princess was hanging upside down in a tree, thinking about how things had changed since the maid came. When the girl jumped down, Diana told her not to step on it because she had just planted flowers here, and the seeds would hurt if you stepped on them. The princess asked the maid what she had planted. The main character replied that roses, sunflowers, hydrangeas would now grow here, and she had planted different varieties. The soil was very soft. The sun's rays warmed it up well, so you have to water them and let them germinate. Diana said that when the flowers grew, you could weave a beautiful wreath out of them. Arys was angry, clenched her fists, and didn't understand why the maid was really treating her like a princess. The girl thought that Diana definitely had some kind of plan. Walking around the neighborhood of the palace, the princess decided that she had to do something to reveal the true face of the maid. Suddenly, on the floor, the girl saw her hairpin. Arys came to Diana, who was gardening, and asked if she had lost anything. The protagonist saw that the girl was holding Choo-Choo's gift in her hands. As busy as she was, she couldn't believe she had lost it. Diana apologized to the princess and told her that the hairpin belonged to her. She accidentally dropped it when she was tending her flowers. The protagonist asked to give the jewelry back, but the princess replied that it was her garden, so the hairpin belonged to her. Diana said that the item was very important to her and asked her to give it back. The princess noticed that the maid suddenly became so scared, she said that if she wanted it back, let her try to catch up, and started to run away. The girl was sure that they could never catch up with her, at least the other maids couldn't. Arys turned around and noticed that this crazy maid was very fast. The girl was tired of running. Diana came up to her and told her that it was bad to play with other people's things, and asked her to come over and return the hairpin. The princess decided that now the maid would respect her as her mistress, and in the end, she would have the last word. Arys threw Diana's hairpin into a body of water. One of the maids, when she was sent to serve the princess, had promised to take good care of her. She hugged the girl and made her feel very warm, like she was with her mommy. Then, this maid was arrested by the knights, who were informed that she was stealing and selling things from the Ruby Palace, stealing imperial property, a crime that equates to treason. The maid begged the princess to save her, and she ordered the knights to let the maid go. The maid packed her bags and told the princess that she thought she would be of some use, but she was useless. Arys looked after her and thought about what kind of princess she could be if she didn't even have a mom. The girl knew how badly non-bloodlines were treated, but she didn't think it would be this bad. The maids were leaving the Ruby Palace one after another. Everyone thought the princess was picky, because of which she didn't even have a personal maid. Arys had a terrible dream that Diana said she was tired of serving the princess and was leaving her. Upon waking up, the girl cried, believing that she had been abandoned by everyone. She was sure that Diana had left too. The girl thought that the main character had been packing all night, and now she would be alone again. So, in order not to be so painful, she prepared in advance for the fact that she would be left behind. Diana opened the doors, walked into the princess saying that morning comes with the sunrise and birds singing. When she saw that Arys was awake, she approached the girl and told her that she could sleep a little longer, because if she was sleepy she would not have an appetite, which could cause stomach problems. The princess realized that she had not been left behind despite the hairpin act. She hugged Diana tightly. Arys cried, apologizing and saying that she didn't mean to do that. The girl asked that she not be abandoned. The protagonist replied that she wouldn't leave the princess, but the girl thought it was a lie. Diana said that what she did yesterday really upset her, but she knows that children sometimes do reckless things. However, she was pleased that the princess apologized. Arys mentioned that she was aware that Diana did not like the Ruby Palace. The protagonist was surprised that this child really knew everything. The girl said that there was a lot of work in the palace. She was the only maid here, while Arys herself considered herself a useless member of the imperial family. The princess held the maid's hand tightly and promised that she would now help with the cleaning and the laundry too. The girl said she wasn't picky and would share delicious food and be a good child. Diana was extremely shocked and puzzled by these words. Arys asked her not to leave her. The imperial princess and the maid. Diana realized that, first of all, this cute child is too stubborn, cries too much, and she should take care of her so that the girl grows up healthy. The protagonist said that she was Princess Arys's maid. From that day on, the princess didn't joke like that anymore. She helped Diana water the flower beds, cleaned, and helped with the laundry. The main character announced to the princess that she would go to school. Naturally, Arys did not want to study, but after all, she herself said that she would be a good child. Diana explained that she didn't have to learn anything complicated. She just had to learn the letters well. For that, she would need a pen and paper. When Diana looked in the suitcase, she found that she didn't have what she needed. The maid approached one of the knights of the Ruby Palace, who replied that the paper and pencils were high-quality materials, and he couldn't just give them away. Diana explained that it was necessary for the princess's education, but the knight was adamant and said that the maids had used the imperial palace materials many times before, covering up for the princess. He threatened the maid that if she carelessly sold these things, she would definitely be held responsible. The protagonist was devastated and crouched down on the steps. Princess Arys came up to her, realized it hadn't worked, and suggested she ask Rasheed about the stationery. The protagonist turned to the princess and asked if she and the prince were in touch. The girl replied that he was friends with her mom, though she was unsure if he would help, but it was the only option. Diana realized that Crown Prince Rasheed would easily agree if it was fun and interesting. One had to try. The protagonist was determined and suggested the girl try writing to him. The protagonist and the princess opened the door, behind which Crown Prince Rasheed was already standing and waiting. He said they had not seen each other for a long time and asked the maid how she was doing. The princess was indignant and asked the prince what he was doing here, since all he had to do was send her permission. Rasheed replied that the letter he received said that his precious little sister needed help and he naturally wanted to come in person. The crown prince said that since they had a guest, they should treat him before he left and asked him to pour him a cup of tea. The princess was angry, and Diana explained that she would love to make tea, but she had no tea leaves. Rasheed smiled broadly and said that he had brought everything with him. His bodyguard Stefan entered the room and brought everything needed for the tea party. Since this was the palace of the imperial family, Diana expected that one day they would meet again, but never thought it would be under these circumstances. Diana could feel Rasheed's eyes on her and didn't understand why he was looking at her like that, and wondered if he remembered her at all. After tasting the tea, the prince said it reminded him of something. Princess Arys liked the tea a lot too. The girl said it was the most delicious tea she had ever tasted. It was not bitter, not very hot. Diana replied that it was just that the crown prince had brought first-class tea leaves. Arys told the maid that it was amazing, and she wouldn't be surprised if Diana turned out to be a princess of another country. Rasheed said she was, and there Diana was amazing. The tea still tasted wonderful. The protagonist realized that she hadn't been shown, and the crown prince remembered her. The princess was surprised that they knew the prince. He was surprised that Diana hadn't told her about him. Arys said that Rasheed was just too small-minded for anyone to talk about him. The prince explained that he was the one who had approved Diana to be the official maid and sent her to the Ruby Palace. Arys asked why he had made that decision. Rasheed replied that he had done so because Diana was very pretty. The princess confirmed that she was. Stefan intervened and reminded his master that the Imperial Council was coming up and they had to go. Rasheed replied that he hadn't finished his drink yet, even though the entire teapot had already been drunk. Rasheed handed his sister a paper. She asked how much she owed him for it. The prince replied that he had drunk some delicious tea and that was enough, but only for today. Obviously, he was going to come again. Rasheed put his hand on Diana's shoulder and said that thanks to her, he had enjoyed a great tea and thanked the girl. She responded by saying that she didn't deserve such a compliment. Arys, looking at their looks, told the prince to stop behaving so insolently with someone else's maid and leave. Rasheed advised the girl to do something about her nasty temper. The maid and the princess were walking through the Ruby Palace. Diana told the girl that she didn't know that she and His Highness had such a warm relationship. Arys denied everything and asked her not to say such creepy things. The protagonist said that no matter what, he personally came after he received the letter and even gave permission. The girl explained that it was just a deal. Because of this permission, she is now in his debt. Because what can be a relationship between rivals for the throne? Suddenly, Diana realized that until someone takes the throne, heirs can be endlessly replaced. This means that the battle with water siblings for the throne is constantly ongoing. Princess Arys called herself a weakling, as she had no mother or family to support her. In fact, she didn't want this, but she is still glad that Rasheed gave permission. The girl noticed that he looked down on her. The protagonist understood the reason why there could not be a good relationship between them. If they really got along, he would not have neglected his sister so much. A princess of the empire was only a force to be reckoned with if she was close to the throne. Arys was unhappy. She had to grow up fast, so Diana let her sneak out peppers she didn't want and sleep late. The girl wanted the maid to teach her everything. The princess wanted to grow up to be an ordinary child with such simple concerns. That was all Diana could do for her. Rasheed and Stefan rode in the carriage, and the bodyguard asked the prince if he really liked Lady Diana that much. In response, he heard that her round eyes were cute, and she looked like a squirrel. Rasheed smiled widely and asked his friend if maybe he should just take this girl to his palace. He asked the bodyguard if he felt anything when he visited the Ruby Palace. Stefan noticed that it was very clean. He assumed that Diana was doing a great job, and yes, Princess Arys looked much better too. The maid also had a talent for taking care of children. Rasheed kicked his bodyguard with his foot and said that anyway, even if he was a knight who only knew how to swing a sword, you can't be so stupid. The prince was saying that finally Arys had opened her heart to Diana. Stefan thought that the girl could learn from the maid to socialize with people and not be divided by social status and power. And the prince assumed that her heart would be hard to win by that alone. Rasheed said that since his little sister was born, their tastes were very similar, plus the girl thought he was cute. The prince decided that they should go to that nice place again, for he wanted to drink the tea prepared by Diana once more.